Welcome back to Overtime here on WOTM. We shift gears from baseball to basketball. Alabama basketball made a splash last year after Nate Oates took that team, had a top 10 ranking towards the end of the year, a great seed in the NCAA tournament, not as good of a showing in the tournament. However, they're beefing up their schedule in the non-conference part of the season. Today it came out that the SEC Big 12 Challenge is now set. Alabama will play the defending national champions from Baylor. Baylor, of course, beat Gonzaga, who walked into the national championship game as the undefeated team, gave them their first and only loss of the year. How impressive is this for Alabama, and how good of a basketball game will this be in late January for all college basketball fans as Alabama laces it up against the Baylor Bears?
I think it's just another example to get Alabama basketball out there and recognized like Alabama football is.
Yeah.
Will it ever be Alabama football? No.
Right.
We know that. But just to get them where they were last year, to where more people were watching them play in the NCAA tournament than probably ever, in the last 20 years at least. So it's a real credit to the program. And we talked about how in college basketball it's much different than college football. So if you want a stronger schedule, even if you lose some of those games, it counts for you because RPI is something where strength of schedule really plays into how they determine an at-large bid if you don't win your conference tournament.
Right.
So I think for them it can only help. They're not going to be under 500 or be in a position where they have to worry about one or two games and being 14-14 and being on the cusp of not making it. I think they'll be ahead enough to where they'll have a strong conference record. That they're going to be an at-large bid heading into the season. I can't see any reason why they would go back to being a team that didn't finish at least 500 in conference. And when you're dealing with that and you're dealing with other teams in your same conference that have a lot of the same criteria, but they don't have the non-conference schedule that you do, and if you could have top-tier teams, top 50-tier teams in that you can look at and the committee says, okay, well, their schedule is one that you're on top 5 or the toughest in that conference, it can really help you. So it's only, to me, there's so many things that are positive about this. I don't see any negatives to playing the best possible teams you can, non-conference for basketball. A little different than football where a loss here, a loss there can really affect your season. Not so much in basketball.
It's a good point. Take a look at the entire Big 12 SEC Challenge. Outside of Baylor, Alabama, some notable games on the slate. Auburn is at home against Oklahoma. And it should be worth noting that Alabama-Baylor game is actually the game in Tuscaloosa this year. So Bama playing back at home after playing on the road last year. All those games are on January the 29th. Outside of Alabama and Baylor, that's number 1 versus number 5 as far as the way that the end of the polls ranked last year. What other games, what other matchups interest you as they move forward?
Well, Tennessee was one of the more disappointing teams in the SEC last year. And you saw even in the SEC tournament how they kind of collapsed at the end. Against Alabama. Kentucky was a team that's always been near the top of the SEC. Calipari, he's going to have great recruiting guys and another top 10 team probably next year. And also West Virginia has been a team that has bounced around from conference to conference. And Arkansas, when they had back in the 40 minutes of hell, kind of getting back to that a little bit where there's a little more pride in their basketball team.
Yep.
And if they can beat and help the conference overall, when this first started and I was a kid, the ACC Big East Challenge, or if you won in that head-to-head, the conference felt pretty good.
Yeah.
So for the SEC to be able to stack up against the Big 12, and everybody talks about, okay, well, which is the best conference and here or there. We know the SEC is the best conference in football. So for basketball, it's just something for them to hang their hat on if they're able to win more games than they lose.
100%. I think the game that kind of sticks out and the one that it's funny we're not talking about is Kansas and Kentucky. It's two blue bloods of college basketball. However, after Kentucky not making the playoffs last year, Kansas a little bit of a disappointment. Good to see if those two teams will bounce back. Now, this Baylor game is one of many games on Alabama's schedule next year that's beefing up to be one of the toughest in the country. Alabama's scheduled non-conference games in 2021 to 2022 is stacking up big time. Along with the Baylor game, the number 1 team in the country, they'll also play Gonzaga, the number 2 team in the country. That first game is in Seattle later this year on December the 4th. They'll also take on Kansas, Miami, and Belmont in the upcoming Advocare Invitational. That is in Orlando over the Thanksgiving holiday. Then they also have Houston, who finished in the top 3, finished in the Final Four, and Memphis. So that's non-conference games against Baylor, Gonzaga, and Houston, as well as got Kansas on the schedule. All this without including your SEC schedule. Yep. Like you said, I think this is a good thing for Alabama and also a good thing overall for these programs to be able to schedule really tough and create some kind of must-watch games in season, which you don't get a lot of in college basketball.
No, it used to be before things got kind of difficult with all the conferences changing and going around. The 3 big preseason tournaments, or the early season tournaments, you had the one in Hawaii, you had the Great Alaskan Shootout, and then you had the preseason NIT at the Garden that I would try to get to every year.
Right.
And you would see a top 5 matchup in that. So those were the big 3, and if you could play in one of those, you were guaranteed to have a much stronger non-conference schedule. Now it's a little more spaced out. There are a lot more tournaments, as you see the one down in Orlando that Alabama's playing in. So it gives an opportunity for more teams to have better resumes.
Exactly. And so Bama beefing up that college basketball resume, lots of great games. And the Baylor Bears, the defending national champions, will be coming into town coming up on January the 29th. Well, coming up next here on Overtime, we will have a second scoop of who's better. Take on 2 Braves, or 2 former Braves, and we'll find out, crunch the numbers, see who's better. We'll debate it coming up next.